You're talking about the Department of Defense, sources from within the Department of Defense?
I'm not willing to reduce the potential universe of where my sources might be.
Okay, moving on. In this report, Mr. Elizondo, for reference, several types of allegedly alien craft or possibly alien craft or unknown aerial phenomena, what we used to call UFOs, are described. Spheres and orbs, discs and saucers, oval or tic-tac, triangular shape, boomerang and arrowhead, and irregular or organic. Mr. Elizondo, does that summarize to you the types of craft that we're discussing today?
So that is a general morphology, historically speaking, of
Okay, so those descriptions are very different craft. Is it your assessment that they would come of different origins?
It's possible, but it also could be a matter of utility. And let me just state for the record, I never read the report or the article that Mr. Schellenberger put out. The reason
That's a good point. We're just referencing it for descriptive purposes for the American people. Mr. Schellenberger, in this report, it's striking to me that regarding the descriptions of experiences with these various craft, several of them include biological effects and several do not. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so spheres and orbs, triangular craft, and irregular or organic craft include some descriptions of biological effects, including feelings of unease, electronic device malfunctions, long-term psychological effects such as anxiety or insomnia have been noted, feeling of being watched, a shared awareness with the triangle craft, and under the irregular and organic craft, biological effects include physical sensations of warmth or cold and unexplained smells and psychological distress.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I would now like to recognize Mr. Timmons for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Elizondo, you just said something interesting. You said they don't seem to be hiding. They don't seem to be hiding. The UAP sightings are becoming increasingly brash, if you will. And, we've been hearing about these for years, but they've generally been isolated and not as consistent and over critical military installations. Would you say that's fair? Is this becoming increasingly is it happening more and more?
Great question, sir. Let me see if I can answer this for you. Certainly there seems to be some indication that they're being provocative, meaning that they're, in some cases, literally splitting aircraft formations right down the middle. So that's an air safety issue. The question is it the frequency increasing? And the response is, it depends. Yes, it's possible that there is an increase in frequency, but it's also possible that there's heightened awareness now, and there's also more pervasiveness of technology out there that's collecting this information and that can record this information. So we're not quite sure yet if it's actually an increase in numbers of these events, or is it that we have better equipment now that to record these things, and we have a better ability, if you will, to analyze these things.
And that's my next question. It seems that a lot of these sightings occur near military installations. Do you think that these UAPs are intentionally targeting military installations, or do you think that we have increased abilities to monitor surrounding military installations?
Sir, maybe both. Part of my concern is we have something in the Department of Defense and the intelligence community called IPD, in initial preparations for battle space. And we use equities like ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and other type of equities and technologies to prep the battle space. And certainly, if I was wearing my national security hat, even if there was a 2% chance that there was some sort of hostile intent here, that's 2% higher than we really can accept. And so we must figure out, there's a calculus, capability versus intent, in order to identify something as a national security threat. We've seen some of the capabilities, yet we have no idea of the intent. And so this is why this discussion is somewhat, I think, problematic from a governmental perspective, because we have no idea.
Sure, thank you. Mr. Schellenberger, you're particularly familiar with the Langley Air Force Base incident a year ago? Are you familiar?
Just from what I read.
Just from what you read?
Yeah.
I would imagine a large percentage of the American population became aware of that with the Wall Street Journal article. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And were you aware of that incident prior to the Wall Street Journal article?
No.
To the rest of the panel, was the Wall Street Journal article the first time that y'all were made aware of what was essentially an over 2-week UAP frenzy over Langley Air Force Base? Were y'all aware of this prior to the Wall Street Journal article? Anybody show hands? Yes, sir. Could you give me how did you become aware of it?
A colleague of mine, I referenced previously, Chris Mellon, he wrote an extensive article about this, that there were other incursions of drones over Langley before this, as well as many, many military installations over the last 5 decades.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Ms. Bober for 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now that we have all been cautioned in this committee hearing
that the mention
of Pentagon's Immaculate Constellation program could
put us on a list. Well,
I already find myself on many lists, I'm sure. So I speak my mind often, so why not just keep going with it? May as well just go all out and say it. The Earth is flat.
Birds are government
drones, and we've never set on foot on the moon, and Joe Biden
received 81 million votes in the
2020 election. So let's just see how many lists we can get on here today. But Mr. Schellenberger, I wanted to ask you, I think I understand from this hearing that you would agree that classifying information like this is not in the best interest of the people. Is that correct?
Yeah, with the caveat that, of course, I would support classification necessary to protect secrets essential to national security, but I think it's pretty obvious that there's overclassification.
Overclassification, yes. And so, in most instances, if they can't tell us what, do you think at some point they'll at least tell us why?
President-elect Trump has repeatedly committed to
greater transparency both on the UAP issue
Look. And again, in an era with AI and ML, we can relatively quickly and easily go through it. So I think it's something that we should encourage NASA to do. However, per Chairman Brockman's comment about UAP focusing on national security sites, I believe there's something, sir, that you may have heard of called sensor bias. That because we've got more cameras, more monitoring of national security, we don't know how extensive UAP activity may be over civilian areas. And this is to the second part of your question, where we're not collecting the data. We're not collecting sufficient data from pilots. We're not collecting sufficient data from civilian and commercial activities. And this is, again, where ASRS, I think, can substantially change that, get the data out there, and allow us to do good science.
Thank you. I mean, on the data, I'm a really big proponent of transparency. But obviously there's always a little bit of balance that we have to have in government on transparency as well. I mean, last year, NASA appointed a director of UAP research in response to the recommendation by the independent study team. In the final report, there's a quote, "Despite numerous accounts and visuals, the absence of consistent, detailed, and curated observations means we do not presently have the body of data needed to make definite and scientific conclusions about UAP." Can you just talk really quickly about that balance of security and transparency?
So I can say, having served at NASA, it is the most transparent organization I've ever been in. When we would have conversations with executive leadership, things would leak out almost instantly. So I can assure you, intentionally or not, NASA's very transparent. I don't know if many of you work with engineers or scientists. They love to talk. So I believe that NASA is a paradigm of transparency. But we must have the ability and the data to be able to be transparent with. And if we're not gathering that, if we're not looking at it, then we can't bring NASA into the game to get to that good science that we need.
You know, it was about a year ago, I was touring a facility with a pretty senior government official. We went by a certain hangar and they said, yeah, that's, a company leases that out. We don't really know what's going on in there. We have no way of knowing what's going on in there. And there's a few of those, in fact, while we were driving around this facility. To what extent do you think that some of the UAP out there comes from off-the-books or unauthorized experimental aircraft?
I mean, I think probably the vast majority of UAP are drones, experimental aircraft, weather conditions, which is again why I say if we review the data, I think we're going to discover a lot about things we weren't even thinking about. But there is a percentage that isn't. And looking into those anomalies is how discoveries will be made. And relative to science, Congressman, if I can say, when NASA studies black holes, when NASA studies galaxies, we have instruments that are tailored to do so. With UAP, we're using cockpit gun cameras or cell phones. We could never do good science with that. And let me tell you, the NASA budget is under pressure. We need to make sure that the Artemis program is funded fully. We need to beat China to the moon and maintain our presence in low Earth orbit. So NASA would need more money to do this, but I think tailored instruments that would look at UAP in the same way that we have tailored instruments to look at astronomical data is important to gathering valuable and uniform information. If we were studying black holes by using fighter cockpit cameras, we probably wouldn't know that much about black holes.
100%. Well, I think it's important that federal leaders take the necessary steps to ensure that UAP does not pose threats to the American public as well, and that we have the necessary budgets to collect this data so we can actually see what's going on. I'm very supportive of funding the Artemis mission. I think it's very important. Also, a personal note, the pilot is a frat brother of mine. He is a member of the Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, and so I would love to see my fraternity make it to the moon.
The red wire is sending the cameras to Artemis, so we will take some pictures of your frat brother and get
there we go. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Ms. Luna for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Elizondo, to your knowledge, can you name the country and around time frame that the first back engineered UAP program started?
Ma'am, unfortunately, I would not be able to have that conversation in public.
Can anyone on the panel name that? None of you? This next question is for Mr. Gallaudet. To your knowledge, have any USOs ever outpaced our submarines?
Yes, ma'am.
At what magnitude?
I don't have the exact speed, but again, a witness came to me, a credible former submarine officer who observed it on sonar data. And this was in the 80s in the North Atlantic during a storm, and it outpaced his submarine by orders of magnitude.
Are you aware of any hotspots that currently exist off our shores in North America?
Not with sufficiently credible data, ma'am.
Okay, we've heard reports of there potentially being hotspots, maybe entry and exit points. Have you heard any of that?
I have not, ma'am, but my colleague here, Mr. Elizondo, does discuss some USO activity that he has observed in certain DoD databases.
Mr. Elizondo, in regards to these aircraft being piloted by whatever they might be, non-human biologics, would you agree that it's likely that they are being piloted by some mind-body connection?
Ma'am, I think it is safe to presume here that they are being intelligently controlled because they, some cases, seem to anticipate our maneuvers, and in other cases, they seem to. I came across an email where the word "stalked" was used in a very secure email between Navy officers discussing their ships being pursued by a UAP.
In our previous panel, we had a Russian here testified to say that some of these were interdimensional beings. Can you speak on that at all?
Ma'am, I'm not qualified, certainly as a scientist or otherwise, to speculate points of origin. I look at everything from a scientific perspective. So if you look at it, for example, instantaneous acceleration, which was one of the observables of the program that I belong to, ATIM, the human body can withstand about 9 G-forces for a short period of time before you suffer negative biological consequences, blackouts, and ultimately redouts and even death. Comparison, our best technology, the F-16, which is one of its older platform, but one of our most highly maneuverable aircraft, manned aircraft, made by General Dynamics, can perform about 17 or 18 G-forces before you start having structural failure, meaning that the airframe begins to disintegrate when you're flying.
The vehicles we're talking about are performing
in excess of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 Gs.
truly horrible experience, and coupled with this was the fact that back in 1989, it's a very different world there. I mean, I know it's a different world in a number of senses, obviously, because time has passed, but the difference is here, I think if people are willing to talk about the UFO abductions, even though there's still stigma and ridicule attached to it, I think people are more open-minded to engage with this. And of course you have the internet now, so you can find support groups. He said no one wanted to talk about this back in the day. No one wanted to know about UFOs, alien abductions, and because of this I suffered a barrage of ridicule and scorn along with a considerable amount of shame. And this book is not only a re-examination of those events for him, but also what unexpectedly transpired within his life, and a deeper investigation into the rawness and disturbing elements surrounding what occurred to him. He says we have to wade into uncomfortable territory in our search for the truth to see what can be truly understood of this anomalous spectacle, because it really is. And he says we have to highlight the truly complex nature of the phenomenon. This is something that we try to do on the show here. I don't like pigeonholing stories. I like to find that there's an interconnected nature to this phenomenon. It's not just people seeing lights in the sky. It's not just people experiencing ghosts. It's not just people having out-of-body experiences. When you look at some of these cases, you find that there are connections between each. You find that when someone comes forward, and then because they're so scared of the ridicule, they're initially reluctant to even say, well, I was abducted by aliens, but when they start talking to other people in the field, they go, oh, I also had this experience when I was young. I also had this strange experience.
So what makes Kinsella's experiences stand out from the usual pattern?
Well, he said the events as they unfolded during that cold winter's snatching in the early hours of the morning are something that are very difficult to explain. But of course, he said he has a twin. Immediately I'm just like, okay, here we go.
So is the twin abducted as well? What's going on there?
Yeah, but it's not in the same incident, right? So first of all, he highlights that he was 20 years old. He lived in a small village of Marston Mortain, which is roughly 5 miles outside the town of Bedford. He said, my twin and I shared a large bedroom downstairs within a cul-de-sac. It was a nice house, a nice area. There wasn't anything that would be, pardon me, indicating that there could be strange things going on, except, of course, for the fact that he had witnessed so-called UFOs in his younger days. Although he writes that I've never felt that they'd been important enough to document them, because to my mind, that seems so far removed from my reality and people just wouldn't understand. And he says, I've been bullied and jeered at by other students for stating that I'd seen a UFO outside my back garden at
night, which had come low and hovered over their garden shed. Now, in this particular incident, he was 11 years old, and he had seen this red fiery object, as he writes there,
floating over his garden shed. He got really
excited when he saw this thing. It was almost like this thing was in a way mocking him. But he goes and tells his mother, he gets his mother off the phone, and his mother comes running over and says, Mum, you've got to see this, you've got to see this. And of course, what happens in these cases, she comes to the window, and it's this large picture window where you can see everything outside, and there's nothing there. And while she may have just hung up the phone or maybe just put it to the side, but she's like, you've just seen a plane, and then let it go. But of course, he says that sometime before this, only, an hour or so maybe before this, he and Ronnie, his twin brother, had actually been in their bedroom laughing and joking about aliens and UFOs, saying how ridiculous the entire thing was. So he writes that the experience felt personal, which is very much what this stuff is. For whatever reason, there does seem to be a personal nature to it. It was as though some invisible force that was now, trying to get him to change his negative attitude towards the phenomenon. And he says the big mistake I made was telling people at school, because I'd become a laughingstock.
She's like, you've just seen a plane,